Where you born?
I was born actually in Penang on the Australian Air Force Base in Malaysia. So technically, I'm not actually a migrant. I'm actually an Australian citizen by birth.
So you are a mix of two culture.
Yeah, pretty much. Though I like to think of myself as a banana. I'm yellow on the outside, but I'm white in the inside. I was diagnosed with what's called moral injury, and moral injury, I felt like the best way to say it is like no one gives a shit about what happens in the world, but I did.
Welcome to my podcast, My Migrant Soul. This is Imran Kashem, serial entrepreneur, formal journalist, and a personal branding expert. I am a migrant. I have a lots of a story. I believe every migrant they have lots of unique story as well. It's come from coming a new country, struggle, coming from challenges, and they have also lots of success story as well. In this podcast, I'm going to interview successful migrant. They have lots of challenges, and they come to a point they feel like they have done a lot. Today, I have a very special guest. I know him last 2 years, and as we talk, we discover lots of things that I don't know. He is like an open book, but very much he's a low profile. I think he don't want to tell what he does, or he don't want to tell this in the public. But finally, he agreed with me to interview and sharing his story. His name is Jack Simkin. He is a wire photographer, humanist, and he does lots of things. He In our story he will share. So I would like to introduce Jack with my audience.
Well, hi there. I'm honored to be here on this podcast and talk about my story. What would you like to know?
Jack, tell me where you born.
I was born actually in Penang on the Australian Air Force Base in Malaysia. So technically, I'm not actually a migrant. I'm actually an Australian citizen by birth. But my mother, she's Malaysian. She had a very wonderful story of where she met my dad. My dad was in the Air Force, in the Australian Air Force, and my mum was the export manager, having to bring in the goods and stuff for the Australian Army into Malaysia. And my mother would be the sign off of the yes and no on whether or not the Australian government could actually bring those into the country. And my grandmother was actually coming to visit Malaysia and go see Penang as a tourist. My dad didn't know anyone that could show her around. And so he asked my mum whether or not she could actually take my grandma around. So my grandmother went on the first date with my mother. It's the best way to put it. Yeah, so from then on, my dad was asked my mother out, and lo and behold, they obviously came to be. I was an Air Force RAF brat for many years. We lived probably in Malaysia for about 4 years. And then when my brother was born, we decided that we were going to try and move back to Australia. But my mother's always been very big in the Malaysian and Islamic community. So she's always been a bit of an entrepreneur. So she's worked on building restaurants and cafes and community sort of like centers, helped build the community mosque here in Werribee, and also look after migrant sort of like hubs, and for women who were fleeing domestic violence.
So what you're telling, like, it's a blending of two cultures, Malaysian and Australian. So you are a mix of two culture.
Yeah, pretty much. Though I like to think of myself as a banana. I'm yellow on the outside, but I'm white in the inside. Yeah, so growing up with Australian culture, I played football. I actually didn't really like football so much. I loved boxing. My dad was a kung fu instructor, and my dad did kung fu, and but I love Jackie Chan movies, so I was a bit of a dickhead. and so my dad made me still do some sort of martial arts. So I got into boxing, and I love boxing. And I have, boxing gloves as my tattoo on one of my hands. Um, and I end up falling in love with kendo and doing other martial arts as well. Um, but yeah, I'm pretty much a white boy in an Asian boys sort of thing. But it was very difficult, sort of growing up with a mother who's very multicultural. Like, she's always setting me up, possibly with a Malaysian, prospective wife. And I was very resistant to my mother, and I was very rebellious, because I just kind of almost didn't fit in. But then I did sort of fit in, where my dad sort of like instilled into me, being proud of who I am. And I just hated, like, during my time when I grew up, there was a lot of bullies. And I hated bullies. And the one bonus of having martial arts skills is, you know how to defend yourself, and you know how to defend other other people like you. So I identified with Asian kids. In fact, most people thought I was Aboriginal, so I defended the whole Aboriginal sort of community as well. So uh, I was always up for fighting. I could go on to many, many different stories about this.
Yeah.
But I have a sense of justice and a love for community and different cultures, and that was really instilled from my mother, and her ability to work with the multicultural sort of community. So I worked a lot in the Footscray Community Arts Centre. Well, my dad, after he left the Air Force, we lived in Footscray for a short time, and then we were homeless for a short time as well, before my dad was able to cash in on his veteran affairs sort of benefits and get a house in Hoppers Crossing in Werribee. Um, but I always grew up amongst many different cultures, and I really was intrigued and wanting to learn about where people came from. And also just assist in building a bigger and better community. So I worked a lot at the Footscray Community Arts Centre, mainly in music and visuals, and video, and sort of I I had some really good teachers at Footscray City College, and they gave me the ability to be able to use cameras, video cameras, film cameras. I learned photography shooting on film. If I hadn't really sort of said it, my main profession is as a photographer, and a videographer. I studied at film school at Victorian University, and yeah, I loved shooting, cultural events and documentaries. Documentaries on social justice was mainly the work that I worked on. And I was very fortunate to have really good teachers. So the first project I ever worked on was for the Shoal Visual Foundation, which was interviewing Holocaust victims, as survivors. And I went from being the camera assistant to being the camera operator, because it was a volunteer position and no one really wanted to do the job for free. But I was so probably enamored by the amount of like cakes that I was getting and fed with. There's these beautiful like Russian sort of honey cakes. They're fucking delicious. And it was like, you know what? Come and do that. And my teachers would just sign me off. Like, I had like the perfect attendance for high school, even though I was probably not at high school for most of the time. So apart from the whole English and sort of writing and studio art sort of thing, they just all signed me off. The only parts that I kind of failed at was mathematics and advanced maths, because my mother, she really wanted me to, as all Asian parents do, be good as being a doctor or an engineer or something like that. So, for a short time, I really excelled in mathematics and algebra. And then I had a taste of photographing homeless people living in the streets in St Kilda. And I realized this was something I wanted to do and pursue. I stayed up till like 1 a.m. in the morning. I hung out in the Gatwick house, which was like literally, I think it was like you could stay there for $5 a night. And I photographed, I guess, the people in the most hardest of times. I got stabbed with a beer bottle by a homeless Aboriginal guy when I was about 16 years old while doing those photos because he didn't want me to photograph him. I didn't understand it at the time. But, but it's still something with me where I wanted to learn about cultures and people and society. And it took me on this great long sort of like voyage of adventure. I had my own film company. It was called Dork Films. I did mainly music videos. I also did a lot of videos for community centers and for PSA sort of like advertisement on. And the tsunami happened in Banda Aceh. And I remembered things that I love, like people like Steve McCurry and James Natchaway, and I really wanted to be a photojournalist. And it's a really hard thing to sort of get into and be able to pursue, especially when you live in Australia, because Australia is very, very enclosed from the rest of the world.
I will come to your that part, but before we go, because you was talking about your childhood, to growing in a like Malaysian Australian family child, how was your schooling and your childhood life?
My schooling and childhood life. I was a bit of a nerd, as most Asian kids are, but I grew up with so many white kids, so most people just assume had a very easy upgrowing. But I got into a lot of school fights. I didn't really fit in. Being Muslim, I didn't really fit into. My mother sent me to Islamic school, and I just didn't fit in at all. It was one, not being able to speak Arabic properly, and then at the time the teacher hit me with the cane. And I told him, like, you hit me again, I will promise you I will hit you back. Obviously, saying that, you're going to get hit. Anyway, I turned around, my hand caught the cane, I pulled it off, and then I swung it. I hit him straight in the face, and I cut him from here to here. He still has that scar to that day, and he's still at Werribee Werribee Islamic School. But I don't know if he teaches anymore. But I remember my sister had him as his teacher, and when he called out her name and saw the last name, she knew where who her brother was.
That's something to remember from. But you was a dropout, isn't it?
I wasn't really a dropout. I finished school. I finished school actually when I was 17. So I was actually an accelerated student. I actually went up a year. I missed out on grade 8 because I managed to bypass all of my scores. My scores were extremely high, and it was only till grade 11 that I discovered photography and film, and I discovered who I really wanted to be.
And when you start professionally with the film and photos, when you started professionally in the early 20s, or you start late?
I actually I started photography and being a professional photographer when I was actually in school. So there was Beat Magazine, which was a photography magazine. They paid like $100 for the weekend. They gave all the rolls of film and also whatever video stock that you needed. And I would shoot Battle of the Bands really late at night. And I have to give some of my money to my dad to pick me up as the taxi driver, so I could go home at 2 a.m. from Fitzroy. But I was like I guess a little mini, I could say like a mini entrepreneur. I'd find ways to make money because my parents always said, like, if you make money, you can have whatever you want. So, I really wanted to be a photographer when I was about 16, and I wanted the best camera, which was a Leica. And the Leica was going to cost me about $2,000 at the time. And yeah, I worked really hard. I took out every single job that was possibly on the weekends, whatever photography jobs. I shot photos for models. I worked for the Footscray Community Arts Centre and other art centres, shooting multicultural projects, going to expos and fetes and photographing events. And then I bought my Leica. So there you go for the camera. There's my Leica to sort of, issue it. I ended up being a Leica ambassador when I became 30. So now I don't really have to buy Leicas at full price.
I think the ideal you have all are using Leica. I think that also inspired you to go to Leica.
Leica was a great camera. I think it's simplistic and sort of thing, but I noticed that a lot of war photographers use Leicas and a lot of journalists use Leicas, and I was just really obsessed with the idea. It's like, I need a nice, beautiful camera. I want the best camera. Leica's the brand. I'm going to get it. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to get it.
And what makes you to move to other countries and taking photos and taking projects? What was the time?
The tsunami happened in Banda Aceh. It was 2004, Boxing Day. About 300,000 people died in Banda Aceh, Indonesia alone. People died also in Thailand and Phuket and various other sort of like small areas. But the most amount was killed actually in Banda Aceh. And my mom's friend, her best friend, actually ran the NGO Salam and Global Peace Mission, which was the Malaysian sort of NGO. So my mom got me a job to be the photographer there. It was hectic. I don't think I was prepared to see so many dead bodies. We just don't get something like that in Australia. And it was really difficult the first few weeks. I remember I couldn't really take photos of dead bodies. What I could do was actually lift them and put them into the truck so they could be in a mass burial. And I felt like that was the best thing I could do. I really found it hard to photograph tragedy. And it was interesting because I ended up going on the beach in Banda Aceh and I was crying. And I said, fuck it, I'm going to go home. Like, I can't do this. Like, I can't do this job. It's so, I can't deal with this misery. And there was these 3 kids and they were playing on the beach and they were making sandcastles and having a fun time. And they asked me to take their photo. And I remember photographing this photo. It ended up being in a UNICEF magazine and front cover, and these kids are having an amazing time, a beautiful time. And, there's 5 kilometers of destruction and, and death and, but life goes on. And I was really into the idea of understanding what it meant to be a human being on this earth. And so I came home to Australia, I'm at the pub, drinking with my friends. I tell them all about the things I'd seen and done. I stayed in Banda Aceh for another 4 months. I had to come back because my housemates didn't pay the rent and I was going to get fully evicted from my house. So I was like, what the fuck? And I'm come back home. They fled. So they actually didn't pay the rent. They hadn't paid the rent for 4 months. Came back home, I organized, fixed, had to fix it all up with the real estate and promised that I would pay all of this back. They had moved back to South Australia, so it was difficult to get at them, but they finally gave me money back. I talked to everyone that I knew, my friends, and no one was really interested in what I'd seen and what I was interested. Like, I read the news and I keep up to date, and I'm interested in world politics and what is happening in the world. And I just felt like I was so far away from everything being in Australia that I needed to go and see what it meant to actually live on this earth. Because life here in Australia is really easy. There is struggles. Without a doubt, there's homelessness. There is, people living, paycheck to paycheck. There are all of these troubles and stuff, but we have a great system at the end of the day where we can sort of get out of debt or we can get out of problems. We do have government systems that can help us. But, you go to somewhere like Afghanistan, there is no one to help you. There's no Centrelink. There's no Medicare. you have to find a way to make money. I really was interested in how these people sort of like lived. There was a documentary on women's rights around the world. It was called Finding Bibi. And I ended up working on this documentary, and then I finished up in India, and I decided I wasn't going to go home. And I just bought a Royal Enfield. I bought this motorcycle and I just rode around India. And I worked for different NGOs just accommodation is what I really needed. And a little bit of money so I could pay for petrol for my motorbike or, you know, but I slept on the streets. I built a hammock, I'd lay around, I find jobs like in Goa, working as a DJ and a VJ, all the way up to Manali, and then I went back to Pakistan. And the earthquake happened in Pakistan. I got a job with an NGO called Muslim Hands, and I was working with them. And I was fortunate enough to go see K2 and go all over Pakistan with this NGO. And then I came back home because my mother was sick, and try and help her with money and look after the family. And I was actually really fortunate where one of my friends, his name's Wally DeBacker from the band Gautier, had suddenly become famous and needed someone to do VJing and doing the backdrops for his videos, but also in the live concerts. So I got to be live in concert and got to be this rock star, I guess. And it was incredible. It was like I had a job to go back to when I came back to Australia, but I still was hungry for more. And this guy who was a friend of the documentary that I worked on, women's rights, his name was Sabor. He was looking for somebody to come to Afghanistan to do a documentary, a travel show. And literally I was in the meeting for more than 2 minutes, and he goes, "You're the guy I want to come to Afghanistan with." And yeah, I ended up being in Afghanistan. It was a 6 months sort of contract, I guess, and I ended up being there for 6 years. And it was the most craziest 6 years of my life. And it's just adventurous. I helped build NGOs like Skaterstan, teaching kids skateboarding. I helped work with a women's boxing team, and I also helped set up disabled basketball. There's just like some of the achievements, but Afghanistan was like this place where you could do things for the first time for people, and just the gratitude that I got just made me want to stay. I mean, it's a really fucking hard place to live in. And I would definitely describe Afghanistan as an abusive husband. He'll be like charming and beautiful at one thing, and one time it's just fucking kick your ass. And he's like, "Fuck it, I'm going home. I'm going somewhere else. Fuck Afghanistan." And then you'd be away for 6 months. You go, "Oh, like, come back." I'm sure he's okay. I'm sure he's gotten better. Maybe I'll come back. And life is sweet for a few more months, and then damn, it's fucking hard. But yeah, from there I was looking to travel. I had met some really amazing journalists that had been killed in Syria, and I really became invested in the Syrian conflict. I found a place to live in Istanbul in Turkey, and I became an expat in Istanbul. And I covered Syria, in the most hardest of times, and a lot of people were being kidnapped, being killed by ISIS. And it really made it impactfully really hard, and everyone sort of pretty much disavowed me as being a journalist because I was willing to accept this sort of fate. It was good in the sense because I came from a Muslim background. I understood Islam, and I understood militants, and the reason why people fight jihad. And it made me have, well, it was protection. Like, I had Al Nusra Front come to my place that I was staying at. There was 20 of them. They were armful to the teeth. And the main sort of like leader, he could speak English. And my fixer at the time was passed out asleep. And, his whole sort of like, next to his desk, is his cigarettes, sort of like butts and stuff. And it's just like this massive taboo. Like, it's like, fuck, we are really fucked. Like, I'm about to be kidnapped and probably, spend a long good time in thing. And then he came up to me. He's like, oh, I saw you, running around in Aleppo, and you were, photographing people, getting killed by the bombs. But then you also stopped having the camera and you started helping people, and then you put them into the ambulance, or you choose who, you're helping the civil defense. And then when there was prayer time, instead of taking photos, you actually sat in prayer, and you listened to everything that was to be said. Um, and we looked at you and we've been following you. And we thought, actually, you know what? You can stay. So welcome to Syria. Yeah, I'm probably shitting my pants. And I was really thinking I was going to be like in prison for several years or beheaded, one of the two, sold off to the best price. And I covered Syria till it was so difficult to keep on going. And then when it became difficult to cover um, the rebel side, I covered from the Kurdish side and the Kurdish struggle. I was really hoping that the both sides would unite together, fight against the Islamic State, and then hopefully Bashar Assad. But I'm quite actually happy that Syria is free now from the dictator Bashar Assad, and that hopefully there's peace. And I'm hoping that I can actually go there. Hopefully in a few months, I'd like to go there and with my fixers and stuff, and see whether or not they want to live in Syria, or they want to, they have their residencies for living in Turkey and living in Germany. So not necessarily they have to go back to their country. They got their citizenship, but I'd like to find out whether or not what they think of their country and whether or not there is a home there for them.
You see some people you're talking, and after half an hour, they are no more. And you feel like, okay, is this the person? Where is this person gone? He killed? Or you see his dead body lie in front of you. Did you see this type of scenario, and how you mentally overcome from there?
Um, I think you can remember their stories and you remember their image. When I talk about it, people feel that I feel like it's cold or I'm painting a picture. And I think maybe that's the way that I process it, because it's still photographing images and keeping images. It's really hard when you actually really know and got to love people. Um, when you get to know them, you feel something. You feel whether or not justice had been served. You feel shock and you feel sadness, but ultimately they've gone to heaven, or they're no longer be a part of suffering anymore. You um, I was diagnosed with what's called moral injury, and moral injury, I felt like the best way to say it is like no one gives a shit about what happens in the world, but I did. And the further that I was away from everything, the more depressed I would be. Like I would be here, like speaking to you, or we'd go out to a party or something, and in my head, something would trigger, and I go, I wish I was not here. I wish I was in Syria. I wish I was in Afghanistan. I wish I was helping people, find their dreams, find their passions, find some way to voice themselves, to voice people's sadness, to be anywhere but anywhere than in me enjoying myself or finding my own peace, sort of thing, if that's where the best way to put it. But I knew I couldn't do it for long enough. If I kept doing it and I kept being there, my risk factor would be so high that I would possibly die.
One of my favorite photojournalists is Salgado,
Yeah.
and I was listening to his interview. He said once upon a time he see blood, he see like people dying in front of him, and he can't, like, there is something happening inside, but doctor can't find out. and like he see that in Congos and Africa conflict, and it takes long time to come out from that, that you see that trauma and everything, and sometimes it impact your personal life. Is it happen to you as well?
I don't feel like blood and death really traumatize me. Suffering and pain does. The the idea, once you passed away, you passed away, but your mother's like, crying, your family is crying, the things that you, as a person that has passed away, what you've, the people around that person has to deal with that grief. That is what I feel more. Who's going to look after the family after the father has been killed by a barrel bomb, or being killed or executed by uh, an army, the opposing army. That's the really hard bit, and that's the hard reality, and that's the things, the trauma that you probably take away the most is was feeling like you couldn't help everybody. Um, Not the blood. I've seen a lot of dead people. I've seen a lot of death, being covered in blood myself. Um, I got shot through my leg. Um, and none of that. I can easily forget that. They're stories. There's stories at the end of the day. But not being able to see people live out their dreams, like the things that sort of hurts me the most was like I had two students from Skaterstan, two kids. One's called Farinas and one's called Fazila. And these two girls, they were like my girls, like I treated them like they were my daughters. Like I paid for them to go to private school and look after them. But, like Farinas, her father had died and her brother looked after her, was the breadwinner, and like decided to marry her off as 15 years old. And there was nothing I could do about it. I had $5,000 and it wasn't enough money to, well, it probably was enough money, but culturally, I couldn't, he would not accept my money. I had to watch a girl lose the chance to be able to be educated, to have a life, and to be married off at 15. The other girl, Fazila, she was sold off to prostitution. And it took me a long, long time to find her. And I found her. And there's obviously the mafia. They all have guns. They all can come and kill me. But I managed to negotiate my way to talk to her. I couldn't change the outcome that day. But through some Afghans that I knew, they were able to make some sort of change and get her out of that position and that thing, because I was terribly upset about it. I vocalized it. I have no idea where she is now, but I know that she got out of that situation. But, for the meantime, before that happened, she suffered so much trauma because I could not be there for her. I could not find her. And that's the hard reality, and things that probably make me upset, that I wasn't able to change certain outcomes.
That's hard to I think process sometimes, and like you go through lots of things. So how many times you think like you are no more, or you come from dead like this much gap?
Yeah, lucky enough I'm wearing sunglasses, so you can see how sad I kind of felt through my eyes. Um, but yeah, I think trying to feel normal. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do these days, is try to be normal. I come back home to live in Australia, and leave that sort of thing behind. It was really difficult because the first time I came back just before COVID. Life was good, getting my life back together. I loved motorcycles, was a motorcycle tour guide, and I was making content and videos on motorcycles, and and then COVID came, and I found myself being a real good professional playing Call of Duty. Lucky enough, managed to do Uber Eats and small other jobs. But I ended up getting a book deal to make a photo book in Afghanistan, and went there, and the Taliban took over. And I decided that instead of going back to COVID Melbourne, I would just live in Afghanistan under the Taliban rule. It was much better, I think. Um, but feeling normal, yeah, it's a hard one. I feel much better in life. I accepted that my sort of saying is what it is, and I just accept that there is often horrible things that happen in the world, and you should also be vocal about it. But you also, yeah, I've learned to be a human being on this earth, and I feel still, if I hear words of injustice, or just people that are racist or just have no understanding what it means to be a human being, I have to school them.
You share other day on the like you was one of the uh, last person coming to the plane from flew Afghanistan with the American troops when American troops left Afghanistan. You was
Oh,
one of them. How you manage that, and what was the situation there? Because
well,
we see everything in the television, like people are in the plane or people, thousands of people waiting in the airport when uh, American troops left Afghanistan.
I was there when the Americans came. Taliban took over. They took over with no problem whatsoever. There was not a single fight. There was not a single showdown, shootout. Taliban rolled in. They rolled in. It was funny. I was like, I say it was like the barbarians came to the gates and like broke in. But my 6 months there, I kind of learned a lot about them, and learned from the trauma that they have come from as well. There's certain things I can't forgive them, but I understand them much more having spent 6 months there. Um, but getting back to the story, it was chaos. Like literally, the airport, there was hundreds of thousands of people trying to get in, to get inside, to go to safety. And my key goal was to make sure my students from Skaterstan that they were made able to leave the country. Yeah, I think a lot of people saw the people who got on the airplane and fell off, like, when it started going. They were actually like, Afghan football team, the people who climbed up on that airplane. Like I feel like they're smart enough to know that they've been on airplane flights and represented Afghanistan for football. You feel like they were smart enough that jumping on the outside of a plane is not going to save them, but that's how terrified people were. Um, I have followed the migrant crisis, um, even for the Syrians that were fleeing to Germany, having to cross the boats over from Turkey into Greece, and been on a boat with them. Smuggled myself in with the smugglers, and the boat sunk, and I had to help get everybody to the shore because most people couldn't swim. Um, and you know, people people will do whatever it takes to get themselves to safety, to be safe. And that time was a very, very hard time to sort of watch, people not be able to go and find freedom or find safety. A lot of them had to either flee to Pakistan or flee to Iran, Um, but yeah, a lot of people were unfairly, like, treated by our governments who had worked on trying to build democracy, and they didn't make it to flee the safety. The Taliban didn't kill them. They did sort of say, like, everything is forgiven. There was obviously certain Taliban that wanted revenge killing. So, if they had lost their brothers and stuff, they were definitely hunting former soldiers, especially special forces and trying to kill them. So lucky enough, a lot of them managed to get to other countries, but it was very difficult times.
You're talking about the safety, and like it has some mental thing as well. Like, are you safe? What do you think? You are safe right now?
Yeah. Am I safe right now in Australia?
Yeah.
I'm pretty safe. I mean, the only thing I'm probably don't feel unsafe is like certain areas while driving the motorbike, there are people who do not know how to indicate properly. Well, it's just how to merge. Like I can drive much better in India than I drive here in Melbourne.
Do you watch television?
Do I watch television? No, not really. I don't particularly watch television. I do read the news. Like I read the news and stuff that's happening um, on my computer.
The reason
But
I'm asking you, like, when you see the fighting in Gaza or any other conflict zone, when you see the news, that makes you traumatized, or what you because you experience so many things, you see so many different conflict, and then when you see that, that's why my question is because
no,
know some of the people they don't see news because if they see news, they become traumatized.
no. I watch the news pretty much daily. I read the news daily. I try to keep up to date daily of what is happening. I have opinions. I'm very upset with what's happening in Palestine and the atrocities that Israel is committing. Every Friday, without a doubt, if I am not working, I will be at the rally. I will. I don't particularly probably voice myself, but I will photograph the rally to know to understand how many people still feel upset about what's happening. Because I feel upset about what's happening. And I feel like we need to voice. We need to also make sure people in Parliament keep some sort of accountability to be able to voice that we can stop wars from happening. There is a way of stopping wars from happening. Um, you know, and the Palestinian and Israeli conflict, it does need a solution. And the solution is definitely a cease and desist and a ceasefire. I feel like the United Nations don't do enough. And Israel just continues to take illegal settlements in the West Bank, you know, and probably what's happening into Gaza right now is that to take over this like it's like Donald Trump sort of sees it, he sees this wonderful fucking beach resort sort of land. And then also like within the sort of corridor and stuff, you could probably open that corridor and you can get oil shipments coming through that way. It's all about money at the end of the day. But what happens to the Palestinian people? Well, they end up becoming this commodity. What should happen is the UN needs to actually enforce and stop the Israeli government. We actually stop and cease the conflict. There should no longer be Israeli settlements. They should actually leave the West Bank. And these areas would be able to be under the sort of corridors for Egypt and Jordan to sort of manage. And the whole international community would be able to manage it. And Israel can just leave the affairs or leave to the actual international community to look after. Um, we keep on sending, when this war is finished and stuff, the way I guess the US or international would have to probably see it is like they would bring all the cement and all the materials and stuff to Israel first before distributing stuff that needs to come from Egypt and needs to come from Jordan. And Israel will just needs to sort of step back and go, this is the way it is. Um, Makes it difficult, obviously, corridor to sort of go across. But most people don't realize that Palestine doesn't have an airport. It doesn't have It doesn't even have a port. It's reliant on Israel. Its money is its shekels. It shouldn't be like this.
What do you think about the Australian government in this conflict? And I know like US has a ally with Australia, and sometimes what US tell they listen the same thing. And like in this conflict zone, you come as a like Australian, you see that thing. What do you think, the Australian government is on the right track, or what you feel like?
Australia is definitely on the fence. They're realizing it's not going to win. It's not going to win elections. They're going to, you know, they're going to backslide if they don't do well in being able to sell arms or intelligence to Israel. We should not have warships out near Cyprus and the Mediterranean to sort of work on intelligence sort of gathering for the Americans and the Israelis. We had like, for example, China wandering around their warships and stuff around New Zealand and Australia. Now we could have easily gone and intercepted them, but no, our ships are actually, helping out with the Israeli conflict. I know this because I have Navy friends who are out there at this current moment. But yeah, we should not be having to deal with Israel. I'm sure they probably have large lobby groups here lobbying. We should not, be giving them any money from our taxes. Americans, like, if you look into their sort of tax things, they've given over, spent over each person five or so, $1,000, to the war machine. We are giving money to the war machine when we pay our taxes. We should just say no, you know, or we should actually, we we break out from the two-party system and we choose people that we want to lead.
uh, Apart from this political conversation, let's divert it to in a different angle. Is what is Jack currently doing? Any project, anything that excite you, or anything that come from your past experience? You're doing something big.
Yeah. So I came back home from Afghanistan and I got a job with a business sort of life mentor. His name's Aaron Sansoni. I work for him. I work in his branding and content. I work, yeah, as a branding and content sort of specialist. Still a documentarian. Still make movies. And yeah, I decided that I will live back here in Melbourne and work on making a movie and work on making my photo book. It's been my lifelong dream to do a photo book. That's my own book and talking about my adventures in life. And best way to say it is I'm almost there at finishing it. The really hard bit was I wanted an ending. I think I wanted somebody else to write my book and come again and look at all my, terabytes and terabytes of pictures. I've got like 40 external hard drives of photos. I feel like someone else should have wrote my book. I feel like I, should have gone out like in a blaze of glory, like in Blood Diamond, just sit there and thing and just call out the person I love and say, I'm really sorry, and die my feelings and wounds. And, um, but alas, no, I'm living and breathing. There's always still adventure in me. And as much as I'm getting older and I don't move as well, um, I will never say no to what could be the craziest adventure of my life.
Where you want to see yourself next 5 years?
Next 5 years. Next 5 years. Well, I have one daughter. I met her mother actually, and I guess I actually have two daughters. But one of my daughters, she's almost going to be 18. And I promised her when she's 18, I would take her on a round the world trip around the world. And even if it just takes a whole year, she wants to see some of the places unknown. She wants to go to Afghanistan. She wants to go to Iran, to Egypt, to just see, I'll do that for her. So that's my dream goal.
Also finishing the book.
Also finishing the book. I'm hoping I can finish the book in July.
All right, no, that's great. I happy and thank you for sharing all this. I think, dear listener, you will learn lots from Jack's stories, and she's such a human that I met. We work together sometimes, and I am very inspired by him. And think this inspire also go to you. And thank you so much, Jack. You find some time, busy time, and spoke to my viewers and having the podcast here. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Imran.